how to train your core to look good, function well, and perform athletically. I've gotten a few questions this week about what good core training looks like, what are things I should include, and what are some exercises I personally use with a lot of my programming. In my experience as a coach, core training is definitely one of those elements of programming and training that is very varied in both approach but also results. As there are many different ways to train one's core, as you can basically be as creative and inventive as you want, often people fall into very different sort of extremes where some people believe in only movement-based training in the sense of I'm always rotating or I'm flexing or extending. On the other side of the same coin, people fall into the anti-movement. So I'm anti-rotation, I'm anti-flexion, anti-extension, where I'm basically just really working to hold a static position there. Neither of these approaches is necessarily wrong. We're often leaving a lot of gains on the table when we resort to one of these specific ideologies though. A good core program involves both types of movements. There is no best core program. What is going to be most optimal for you might be very different to the person next to you, as your individual strengths and weaknesses might contrast completely with theirs. So while myself as a lacrosse player, I need to have a fair bit of sort of lateral flexion and the like, as well as rotational movements, both the lateral flexion in terms of keeping my QLs and obliques healthy, whilst also the rotational movements to really practice my power generation and keeping those mechanics nice and smooth through my torso. That might be very different to a swimmer or someone that spends a lot of time in a very extended position rather than generating force rotationally quite as much. Or someone else that might have had a disc bulge in their lower back and might need to be a little bit more wary about what they're doing and trying to build up those mechanics and tolerance into those tissues again rather than starting from a much more advanced standpoint. I like to break up my core movements into 3 different sections. Part 1, sagittal plane movements. Sagittal plane movements are generally what are considered front to back movements, so sit-ups, back extensions, leg lifts, pretty much anything where I'm going forward and back on rails here. Section 2, frontal plane movements. Frontal plane movements, anything where I'm generally going side to side. So exercises that would fall into this count would be things like side bends, side planks, windmills, and just about any other laterally flexing movement. Section 3, rotational based movements. So this is pretty much where everything that doesn't fit into camp 1 or 2 gets put. Anything from Russian twists, rotational med ball slam, pretty much anything involving rotation of the torso and core. So today I've got 3 examples of movements for each of these 3 categories here that I use both for my own training, with my athletes, with my Gen Pop clients, and with my programming as well. So let's jump over to them. Now that you've seen some examples of movements I use both in my coaching as well as my personal training, touch a little bit more on how I put them in programming wise. Personally, I'm not a huge proponent or believer in having a specific core day. It's basically just too inefficient for most people. Very, very rarely does someone have either the time or available sort of training resources in terms of energy and recovery there to justify actually spending one entire session/day of training on their core. If you're taking more of a sort of prehab rehab approach there in the sense of I'm trying to nip some issues in the bud before they really exasperate and get too large, like a little more understandable. But I wouldn't have just core be the singular focus there. I'd definitely add other things on top, whether that be some aerobic conditioning, some anaerobic sprinting exposure or something like that, where you're getting more bang for your buck than just being a singular core focus in that session. The way I like to include core can be sort of put two different ways. Depending on the amount of time you have available, if you have ample time and you can train for as long as you need essentially, having it at the end, as it won't really detract from any of your main lifts or movements you're doing in the actual session, but still allows good quality at the end. I'm a big fan of that. Also, if you're quite poor on time and you're trying to get through a session in like a minimum amount of time, supersetting with another lift, like if I've done some sort of like bench press contrast where I might be doing like a heavy bench into like a med ball throw and then going from that med ball throw into a core movement there. It's a great way of including it, fitting it in well, whilst also not letting it detract from the other things you're doing in that session. Using some of these movements will definitely help you have a much more balanced core program. Throwing some of these movements into your core training will allow you to function better, look better, and perform better athletically. Don't neglect your core training. If you do, it will come back to bite you in the long run. It's one of those ones where it won't strike you immediately as to a deficit there or sort of detraining effect, but like anything, neglecting a plane of movement or tissues, something's going to inevitably come unhappy and potentially suffer ramifications from that. So get on it, make it strong, make it robust, build that resiliency into your body, and you'll be thanking yourself later on. If you want to see more videos like this addressing both types of training in terms of how I view them programming wise and structure wise, as well as specific examples of exercise I use, let me know down below. At the moment, about 95% of you that are watching this aren't currently subscribed, and it would mean the world to me if you guys could jump down below, show this video some support, whether that be a like, a comment, a subscription, all mean the world to me. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good one.